This is Letter from America. Today's topic is Mnangagwa and ZANU PF violence and rigging strategy to win the elections is intensifying but with diminishing returns. The phenomenal successes by CCC in mobilizing at grassroots level voter registration, despite all efforts by ZANU PF acting in collaboration with the police to ban CCC rallies, has amazed this dizzy Repachinoi outfit. ZANU PF is increasingly becoming aware that its old tactics of politically motivated violence are not producing the desired results. Yet ZANU PF itself has no viable strategy to campaign peacefully because it has long lost the support of the majority of Zimbabwe. More than 6 rallies organized by CCC have been banned by police. This was without doubt under the orders of ZANU PF. Chances are more CCC rallies will be banned as the nation heads to the elections this year. This is a clear indication that ZANU PF knows it no longer enjoys the support of most Zimbabweans. CCC rallies last year attracted hundreds of thousands of people despite efforts by ZANU PF thugs and the police to block them. According to the Zimbabwe Peace Project reports, more than 80% of politically motivated violence last year was committed by ZANU PF and the police against CCC. Last year's CCC rallies were attended by 50,000 people in Highfields, 30,000 in Bulawayo, and an equal number in Gokwe, Kwekwe, and Kweru. This showed that CCC is now a political force to be reckoned with in Zimbabwe. The CCC rallies were successful despite attempts by the police to set impossible conditions and politically motivated violence by ZANU PF thugs. The rallies also demonstrated the evolving citizens' empowerment through sheer defiance. This is significant because 7 years ago, Itai Dzamara staged a one-man protest against the Mugabe regime. He was subsequently abducted by agents of the Mugabe regime and has never been heard from since. One journalist tweeted, "He, Itai, left behind 2 children and a wife who is struggling on her own. Itai was fighting for all of us." What was disheartening about Dzamara's protest was that he stood alone in Union Square holding a Mugabe must go placard. People passed by. Some sat on the park benches watching him. No one joined him in protest. But today, Dzamara's message is slowly sinking in the minds of mostly Zimbabwean youths who are now taking action to empower themselves and stand up against the regime. Dzamara's message was essentially that no one will come like a knight in shining armor to rescue Zimbabweans. This message was echoed by Makomborero Zwinawashe when he said, "We are the ones we have been waiting for." CCC was born on January 22 last year. In that year, it won more than 60% of all by-elections for council and parliamentary seats. The political rallies involving CCC led by Chamisa, ZANU PF led by Mnangagwa, and MDCT led by Monzora were a dramatic statement about the political dynamics in Zimbabwe today. Judging by attendance, it has increasingly become very clear that the CCC is in the lead for popular support. The contrast between CCC and ZANU PF rallies has always been like night and day. ZANU PF rallies were held close to CCC rallies, make it look like competition for popularity. And in all cases, CCC rallies drew far much larger crowds. Some may argue that by looking at the pictures, it seems the ZANU PF and CCC rallies were competitive. Well, not really. ZANU PF rallies had all the characteristics of a coerced attendance. People were forced to attend ZANU PF rallies. Businesses and in some cases schools were forced to close. Many buses were used to bring people from around the country. Pictures of people at the ZANU PF rallies showed gloomy looking faces and lack of enthusiasm or celebration. When ZANU PF sabotaged the CCC rally in Gokwe, for example, last year, and tried to bus people to its rally in Kwekwe, people refused to board those buses. And according to one CCC supporter who refused to board, the buses returned empty. When people tried to leave the ZANU PF rallies before they were finished, police and thugs were forced them to stay. At the grueling end of the ZANU PF rallies, many people complained they were left stranded and without the food and drinks they had been promised. In contrast, CCC rallies were strictly voluntary. No one was coerced to attend, no one was forced to attend, no one was bussed the way ZANU PF rallies were conducted. No businesses or schools were closed. And the pictures of the CCC rallies demonstrated jubilant crowds dancing, singing, and in an ecstatic mood. ZANU PF had all the resources it needs to fund the rallies and other campaigns. It received more than $350 million in funding from the Political Parties Finance Act. Monzora's MDCT received $149,850,000. Chamisa's CCC received nothing. In addition, ZANU PF used the state resources like government vehicles, the police, the army, CIO to, among other things, brutalize political opponents, especially the CCC. In terms of resources, ZANU PF was the biblical Goliath, and CCC was like little David. Yet, in the number of people who attended the rallies, the David's CCC victory over ZANU PF Goliath was evident. Ironically, Vice President General Constantino Chiwenga was right. He said ZANU PF was like a Goliath and Chamisa's CCC was like David. And as we all know, David or CCC decisively defeated Goliath or ZANU PF in terms of attendance and enthusiasm from the Zimbabwean people. The Bible, 1 Samuel 17 to be exact, tells us what happened when Goliath fought David. As if in fulfillment of a biblical prophecy, in the first round of the fight and in terms of attendance at the rallies, far more people attended the CCC rallies than those of ZANU PF. Projections by any measure are that CCC is headed for a landslide victory. Even ZANU PF knows that. The key questions now are not who is projected to win the elections. That is patently obvious. But whether ZANU PF is prepared to accept defeat, that is the question. In the case of Mnangagwa, Will he step down if, as expected, he loses in 2023 elections? Like what his colleague in last year's Zambian elections, Edgar Lungu, did? The best estimate is that Mnangagwa and ZANU PF will not allow the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission to announce that Mnangagwa has lost the election. He has learned a lot from what happened in 2008 elections, where Mugabe lost to Tsvangirai but refused to accept defeat. Mugabe subsequently delayed announcing the election results by more than 1 month. During that period, ZANU PF engaged in a frantic manipulation of the vote numbers to reduce Morgan Tsvangirai's victory from around 75% against Mugabe's less than 30%. The figures that were eventually released were Tsvangirai had 48% to Mugabe's 43%. According to the Constitution, Tsvangirai needed 50% plus 1 of the votes to be declared the winner. This forced a runoff, which ZANU PF needed badly in order to launch a vicious strategy of violence. A countrywide explosion of violence followed, orchestrated by war veterans, ZANU PF militia thugs, and security force members who actively supported the ZANU PF campaign. Buoyed by the army's support, senior ZANU PF officials declared that the party would not accept defeat in an election because they claimed that Zimbabwe had been liberated through war, not the ballot box. Amid acute food shortages, food aid became another election tool. ZANU PF controlled the distribution of food, and non-MDC activists and supporters were denied supplies. It is estimated that more than 1,000 MDCT supporters were killed. That led to Tsvangirai withdrawing his candidacy, leaving Mugabe as the sole candidate in the runoff. It is from this experience that ZANU PF's strategy was never again to allow the ruling party to lose elections. An angry Mugabe declared that a ballot can never replace the bullet. He thumped the table with his fist as he repeatedly screamed, "Never, never, never again." What Mnangagwa and ZANU PF learned from the 2008 elections was the need for a systematic manipulation of the voting process to avoid the party being declared a loser at the end of the elections. There is a hierarchical structure that enables ZANU PF to determine the result of the elections. This structure is run by the Joint Operations Command, or JOC. It consists of securocrats from both ZANU PF and the Army and the CIO. JOC is a superstructure in the way Zimbabwe is governed today. JOC operates in close coordination and collaboration with the ZANU PF's Central Committee and the Politburo. Below this superstructure is government, the courts, and the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, or ZEC. Any election results are monitored and reviewed by JOC before they can be made public. A prominent Zimbabwean politician wrote a book about how the election results were manipulated and changed to give victory to Mnangagwa. Chamisa had clearly won the 2018 presidential elections, but JOC changed the results and declared Mnangagwa the winner. This pattern of vote manipulation and use of violence is the hallmark of ZANU PF participation in elections. Some apologists have said that both Mnangagwa and Chiwenga have stated they do not support violence and have urged people not to engage in violence. But the same Chiwenga threatened Triple C leader with violence at another rally. When Chamisa said Triple C would not allow elections to be stolen again. This was interpreted to mean he would urge his supporters to resort to violence. He was widely condemned by both Mnangagwa and Chiwengwa and their state media echo chambers. Yet, when ZANU PF thugs engaged in violence at the Triple C rally, where they killed one person and injured dozens of people, neither Mnangagwa nor Chiwengwa condemned the thugs. If ZANU PF thought the politically motivated violence would be ignored by the international community because of attention to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, they were clearly wrong. Amnesty International UK, USA, and Sweden condemned political violence against Triple C. Their embassies also called for a swift investigation and the prosecution of the perpetrators. Melaine Robinson, the then British ambassador to Zimbabwe, said she was concerned by reports of violent attacks on opposition supporters at rallies. Robinson said it was vital that perpetrators are brought to justice and that all parties can campaign freely without fear of violence. The United States Embassy called for the broad support to end political violence, adding, there is no room for political violence in a democracy. Asa Persson, the Swedish ambassador to Zimbabwe, said it was key that perpetrators be brought to justice. Police reported the arrest of 16 people, most of them carrying ZANU PF party cards over the violence. When the suspects were arrested hiding in a local bar, police recovered machetes, knives, catapults, and whips in their vehicles. But most of them were subsequently released. There's no indication that the rest will be tried later on jailed. The killer of Ncube was reported to be at large. Many suspected he was being sheltered by ZANU PF. And this came just weeks before the scheduled elections, by-elections of March last year. Responding to the brutal killing of one supporter of political opposition and the injury of more than a dozen others at a Citizens Coalition for Change rally in Kwekwe, Mulea Mwananyanda, Amnesty International's Deputy Director for Southern Africa, said, "This assault bears all the hallmarks of a premeditated attack that aims to intimidate the political opposition and block access to their constituents ahead of the upcoming by-elections in March. The government's rhetoric has done much to incite such ferocious violence and unfortunately little to ensure the free exercise of the rights to freedom of assembly and association. The Zimbabwean authorities," Mwalanda said, "must immediately end the culture of politically motivated violence by refraining from issuing inflammatory statements that may incite violence, and they must ensure an impartial, independent, and transparent investigation into this attack. The perpetrators must be brought to justice." Yet, just the following month, another ZANU PF gang appeared at Imbizo 4 shopping center in Kwekwe, where Triple C was holding a rally. The gang's efforts to prevent people from attending the rally soon turned violence. Mboneni Ncube, a 30-year-old man and supporter of the Triple C, died after being stabbed, while at least 22 others were seriously injured. The gang allegedly used not only machetes but also beer bottles, iron bars, spears, and bricks to attack supporters, while Nelson Chamisa, the leader of the Triple C, was giving a speech. And then, yet the day before this violent attack, Zimbabwean Vice President Constantino Chiwengwa had sent a warning to the Triple C, saying the ruling party would crush the party like lice. The Triple C has been victim to a number of politically motivated violence. from ZANU PF. To its credit, Triple C has resisted to counterattack ZANU PF. Many people felt that Triple C supporters should not allow themselves to be beaten like sitting ducks. What is emerging now is that Triple C's strategy of non-violent defiance is, as a matter of fact, paying off. ZANU PF thugs and the police, in their desperate efforts to stop or disperse crowds at the Triple C rallies, have been unsuccessful. In the prophetic words of Makomborero Haruziwishe, "We are many, they are few." Thousands of Triple C supporters stood in defiance of attempts to scare them, and they succeeded. At the Gweru Mkoba Triple C rally, heavily armed police came in trucks. Initially, people seemed scared and stood up to run. Triple C president told everybody not to be afraid and to sit down. The people sat down, and Chamisa continued with his speech. Nothing happened to them. The dreaded police did not dare come to disperse the crowd. That is the emerging power of resilience and resistance by the Zimbabwe. It must be noted, however, that under the international law, people have a right to defend themselves using any means necessary when they are subjected to unprovoked attacks. In yet another act of politically motivated violence, suspected ZANU PF thugs set fire to the house of Triple C Bindura Ward Councillor Oswald Shambare. He had hosted a party for his Triple C colleagues, but when Shambare tried to report, the police refused to take his statement. A delegation of the Triple C went again to report a case of arson, and again the police refused to take the complaint. The delegation tried again, but they found the police station had been deserted. The police had actually run away. The complicity between ZANU PF thugs and the police could not be more obvious. With all these by-elections that took place last year, ZANU PF increased its tried and tested method of politically motivated violence to scare away voters. At the same time, the citizens watchdog, Tim Pachelu, revealed more evidence of vote rigging by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, or ZEC. The message to Zimbabwe is clear. Mnangagwa and ZANU PF are ready to use force of violence to retain power. They know they cannot win peaceful elections, and therefore they have to resort to violence. The national question for Zimbabweans is, what happens when Mnangagwa and ZANU PF refuse to accept defeat in the elections like they did in 2008? But despite this ongoing ZANU PF violence, Zimbabweans have massively rejected ZANU PF, and their message has repeatedly been that ZANU PF is no longer relevant to their lives. After 42 years of misrule by ZANU PF, Zimbabwe is in a dilapidated state, and ZANU PF is now a liability to the people of Zimbabwe. And that defiance campaign simply states that ZANU PF will not rule Zimbabwe forever. And the winds of change, the words of prophets and young Zimbabwean revolutionaries are now circling above ZANU PF like vultures over a carcass. But the unanswered question in this situation in Zimbabwe is, what will Zimbabweans do? Will they allow themselves to be slaughtered like sheep? There are slogans some human rights activists have been chanting in calls to action by the Zimbabweans. Some of these popular slogans are Zvakwana, Sokwanele, enough, Kusikufa ndekupi, we are many, there are few.
This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis